Hey guys, we're going to look at trigonometry now. Now, don't let your parents or anyone else tell you anything different. It's really not that difficult. It's actually probably pretty similar to Pythagorean theorem when you first learned it. So it's really not that tough, but some people get really scared about it. It's not that bad. So the first trig function that we're going to look at, and there's several of them, is sine. So there's sine, cosine, and tangent is what we're going to look at. There's others, but those are just the three that we cover in geometry. So we're going to look at sine. So sine represents the ratio of the opposite side of an angle, okay, the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. So that's what this part is saying right here, okay? Theta is the angle in which is the angle being referred to as. So if we have the sine of A, angle A, that's going to be right here. The opposite side length, remember, is just directly across from it. So this is the opposite side. So this would be BC. So the sine of A would be equal to BC divided by the hypotenuse, which would be AC. All right. And then likewise, it's a little bit different when you move the angle to the other angle, which would be angle C. We won't ever use the right angle. So C, the opposite side length, the sine of C is going to be opposite, which is AB, divided by the hypotenuse, which is AC. All right, so AB is that opposite side. So if you'll just remember right now, we're just talking about sine. Sine is the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. So let's take a look at this as far as what does this look like with problems, because that's what you're really concerned about. So we're going to look here and we're going to find the value of x. So right now, starting out, we're going to have to find just the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. So what you'll notice is that we have an angle measure here and we have the opposite side. So that's x. So this is the opposite side. And we have the hypotenuse, which is 13. So remember that sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So it'd probably be a really good idea to start writing that out every time so that you remember. So we have the sine of some angle, which is going to be 29 degrees, is going to be equal to the opposite, which is x, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 13. We don't know we know that one. We don't know the opposite side length. So then to solve for x, we still follow those that order there. We're going to get rid of divided by 13. I'm going to multiply by 13 on each side. So then I'm going to go to my calculator and I'm going to plug this in. So there's not a way for you to do this without your calculator or Desmos. You can use Desmos as well. One thing that you want to make sure is that your calculator is in degrees. Okay, so you'll notice that it says DEG up there. If it doesn't, you just use a little mouse pad like this and you scroll up there and you click it and it'll change it to degrees. So I'm going to do 13 times sine, which is underneath a trig, underneath control, the sine of 29 degrees. Okay, so you're going to plug it in just like that right there. And so then you see that it is 6.3. And then that's that side length. Okay, so that's how we use trig in a right triangle to find another side length. Because remember, if we're given two side lengths, well, we can choose Pythagorean theorem. But if we are only given one, we're going to have to use trig. All right, so on this one, we're asked to find the hypotenuse side. So we are going to start off with 46. Let's see, we have sine, which is sine of an angle. I'm going to say theta is equal to the opposite over the hypotenuse. Okay, so we're given 46 degrees. Okay, so opposite of that is going to be 8. So we're going to have the sine of 46 is equal to 8 divided by x. Now, to get rid of the divided by x, it's kind of hard to take that and get rid of that in one step. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply by x on each side, and that gives me x times the sine of 46 is equal to 8. And now I'll divide by the sine of 46. And so now what happens is basically x and sine switched. It's just that's not a mathematical term. So it's not a mathematical reasoning for there. But what ended up happening is that they switched. Just be really careful about that, because if you switch it on one that's not supposed to be switched or whatever, it can just get really confusing. So it's nice for you to follow these steps. And then I just go to my calculator and I'm just going to type it in just like I see it. So 8 divided by the sine of 46. And it looks like this. This is what I typed in, and I get 11.1. And that makes sense. I should have a side length that's longer than the other side because the hypotenuse is still the longest side length. Okay, so that still has to happen as well. All right, moving on to example 3 here, we're going to find the measure of DF. So that's the part that we don't know again. So we have an angle measure of 20, and we're looking at the opposite. So that's going to be X. So remember that sine of your angle is going to be the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. And I will say that lots, and we're going to work on that a lot. So we have the sine of 20 is equal to the opposite, which is x divided by 8, which is the hypotenuse. Then I'll multiply by 8 on each side. And then what I'll end up doing is just plugging it straight into my calculator. So sine times, or excuse me, 8 times the sine of 20, make sure it's in degrees, and I get 2.7. So x is equal to 2.7, which makes sense. It should be shorter than 8, smaller than 8. So if you didn't get something like that, you would want to make sure that that's what you have there. Also, if you're in radians, you can get a negative number. So that's another reason why you want to make sure it's in degrees. All right, the last one here, there's two things about this one that makes it a little bit more challenging. First of all, we're going to have to draw it. And second of all, we're actually going to find the degree measure. Okay, so I'm going to have a little, have a wall here or building, and I have a 12-foot ladder. So this is going to be 12 feet. Makes a right triangle right here. Okay, makes a 90-degree angle here. So 12 is going to be my hypotenuse. It reaches 8 feet up the wall. So the distance from here to here is going to be 8. And then it says, what is the measure of this angle that the ladder makes with the ground? Okay, so we're trying to find that angle measure. So remember that the sine of theta is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse. I'm going to have the sine of theta, because I don't know theta, is going to be the opposite, which is 8, divided by the hypotenuse, which is 12. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the inverse of sine. So that looks like this. Sine with a little 1 on it. Okay? And so then I'll plug this part into my calculator. That gets rid of this sine on this side, and I'm just left with theta. So I'm going to plug that in. And I get 41.8 degrees. So this makes a almost 42-degree angle with right here, the ladder and the ground. All right. So big key things, make sure you remember that sine is the opposite over the hypotenuse. And so just keep remembering that, keep writing it down. We're going to practice it a lot. And now it's time for you to practice on your skill check.